to the first episode of Right to Count. This new podcast focuses on the rules of engagement for sexual violence survivors. My name is Frinée Warren, and I am your host. This is Jenna, and she is your co-host. She is a 7-year-old should tease. She will be joining us throughout. While most attention in the sexual devastation arena focuses on prevention and offender management systems, the most critical yet neglected conversation centers on how society communicates about and with those who have suffered. Specifically, the coworkers, family, friends, educational, legal, and medical staff that interact with those who lived past the abuse. These seemingly irrelevant participants in the hurt person's life have unknowingly too much power for how they wield their attitudes, behaviors, and words. If the impact of these attitudes, behaviors, and words were not fervently long-lasting and wickedly damaging, I would not care. That, though, is not the case. I have worked with new and seasoned survivors who have overcome beastly offenses and cannot overcome these harmful interactions. Consider that someone can be beaten and inhumanely attacked for years and manage to heal. Yet the chronic consequences of demeanor, expressions, and presence from those who love, like, and even want to help them recover remain in full force. The failure to regain health then becomes a community problem. Carl Jung clarified this by saying, quote, "We don't get wounded alone, and we don't heal alone." This collective problem is visible in all groups. This phenomenon is present in family estrangements, which forever rupture a family unit. It is present in the premature departure of students without their degrees from higher education institutions. It is often the reason for suspending medical treatments. A dearth of trust in the police is a typical result for those who begin their after-assault lives there. With much effort, the wounded regain their capacity to live after abominable violations. Yet they find themselves forever bisected and alienated from many people who once populated their lives. So, if we as communities cannot prevent sexual destruction, then we as communities must eliminate these after-the-fact repercussions. This podcast reveals how communities can prevent additional suffering. We will discover methods to transform that additional pain into experiences that are either neutral or advantageous. Sexual misconduct typically happens away from view. Shame, fear, threat, and rejection make it almost impossible to rescue the offense from the hidden and the dark. Dr. Judith Lewis Herman is a contemporary psychiatrist who studies trauma and post-traumatic stress. She developed the diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. She states, quote, "In order to escape accountability for his crimes, the perpetrator does everything in his power to promote forgetting. If secrecy fails, the perpetrator attacks the credibility of his victim. If he cannot silence her absolutely, he tries to make sure no one listens. End quote. In every community, in every neighborhood, in every school, it happens. In every place a group of people meet, it happens. As a society, we cannot prevent these harms. We've tried. Therefore, we must prevent further damage once the defacement has occurred. And that is no small accomplishment. Dr. Judith Lewis Herman again states, quote, "It is very tempting to take the side of the perpetrator. All the perpetrator asks is that the bystander do nothing. He appeals to the universal desire to see, hear, and speak no evil. The victim, on the contrary, asks the bystander to share the burden of pain. The victim demands action, engagement, and remembering." End quote. Words matter. The labels of endurer, injured, outlaster, outliver, persister, resistor, sufferer, survivor, sustainer, and victim all work to identify one who manages and withstands the horrendous experience or set of experiences. These tags can get contested. I believe the person who lives past the abuse gets to choose, and that the term that they choose must be respectfully complied. The person that lives beyond the abuse did not get to choose to become a victim, so it is an important act to be able to select that new post-adversity identity. I know that more than one term can be chosen and that preferred terms can change over time. I remember when victim represented me more than any other label, as I was profoundly shattered and vulnerable. The healthier I have become, the more flexible I am between and amongst these labels. It took a long time for me to get to where I am now, and it took a long time for me to become more than a victim. It required a significant amount of therapy, effort, sacrifice, financial investment, and discipline. I long to make the details of how to avoid piling up the negligent damage known, so that those in recovery only have the actual predatory moments to heal. That has not been the case for me. I've had to work through comments, attitudes, judgments, and behaviors in addition to 336 sexual offenses. It has been 50 years since my first onslaught of sexual assault, and at times I still have to work through post-assault iniquities. My first sexual assault came when I looked like this. This is the passport photo I had when I immigrated to the United States from El Salvador at the age of 4. On a Pan Am flight, this girl arrived in the U.S. on August 4th, 1974. In September of that year, her second month here, her mom walked in on her being orally raped. There was no urging to wash out her mouth. There was no furious effort to grab her from her rapist's forceful grip. She couldn't even speak English. However, she got into equal trouble as her new and eldest stepbrother for what her mom saw. You may wonder, what kind of healing have I achieved if I still have to focus on overcoming the tangential to the significant occurrence. One of the misperceptions that exists is that there is a one and done with trauma. I've dealt with that already is a phrase I often hear from first-time clients who are convinced that their wounds have been adequately addressed. I want to focus on what is said, done, and felt in moments that were not meant to be hurtful, but have become only that. The way things land on someone can be utterly shattering. By the time this girl was 5 years old, 3.5 months after arriving in the United States, she had been molested 13 times. Many believe that if it happened so long ago and the memories are vague rather than crisp, the impact is minuscule. This is also untrue. The most damning impact I've had to deal with has been the way my family has responded when I shared what happened to me. That had nothing to do with the attacks. That was strictly their reaction to me. This everlasting impact can be cleaned up. Further, this impact is worth mitigating so that its consequences are non-existent. My attempt here to guide the conversation that is rarely, if ever, spoken about is a plea to become more caring and more familiar with how our attitudes, words, behaviors, looks, and mannerisms affect others who are deeply wounded. They won't always be deeply wounded. Hopefully, everyone gets the help they need in the time they need it. That doesn't always happen. In fact, I'd say most people who have survived similar injuries walk around with massive wounds that have been untreated for far too long. It is painful to rub against the slightest friction with this level of sensitivity. I understand that most colleagues, families, friends, educational, legal, and medical staff do not want to have that kind of imprint on anyone who is going through comparable distress. I also understand that this type of damage occurs more often than not. Many tend to be too careless and casual about responding to an intimate wound because they are unfamiliar with how to receive it. The sensitivity of such a reveal is heightened to the degree that a glance can be felt as a smack. It is the guidance to scale these moments with less ruin that I aim to provide. As a very private person who is most comfortable in a supporting position out of the limelight, this podcast is a challenge. Revealing what has happened to me and how it has affected my life these last 50 years is a considerable risk. I want to give myself a reprieve while recording, so I include Jenna. She helps balance my emotions and is an actual eye candy. I want to circulate what it has taken to recover from 336 sexual assaults and countless preventable hurdles from those in my vicinity. I know lots of people will not be able to relate to my history of abuse. I do believe, though, that everyone will be able to relate to absorbing ill-timed, devastating comments that continue to haunt. My purpose is to flesh out those seemingly insignificant moments of interaction that become bombastic. In addition to this podcast, I help people heal from wounds similar to mine. The first 7 years of motherhood I spent in therapy, individual, group, and couples therapy with my husband. Then I went back to school and earned degrees in human development and group psychology. I've not stopped searching for healing. I've now attained quite the comprehensive toolbox for achieving and maintaining emotional and mental health. When we are all elevated and disgruntled, we need guidance. Guidance to not cause more harm, guidance to reconcile or resolve. Guidance is needed to restore conversations so we can breathe easier and for a little bit longer. In my work, I deal with intractable conflict. I am adept at identifying patterns of behavior, thought, and speech that unnecessarily escalate emotions. These heightened spots are not the only areas where conflict can occur. When I was little, I thought that the only thing that could take the scary rage from life was being a white person, which left me hopeless because in my family, we were all brown. This kid logic remained alive until I was well into my career and family life. At some point in my reflection, I realized that every client I had in my practice was white, except one who was black. None were brown. Each client was coming to me for help with a conflict. I recall the day when that kid's logic collided with the reality of my adult life. I recall the shock. I recall the ache to travel back and share with my 4-year-old self that the never-ending cruelty in my family was not tied to our skin color. All that bloodshed was tied to an absence of how to achieve and maintain healthy mental and emotional states. Deficits of health were the cause of the criminal savagery that I and my 5 siblings endured. So this ends my first podcast episode. What a relief. We did it, Jenna. I hope I have piqued your curiosity and that you decide to stay with us for the rest. May we all get the help we seek from those who surround us. Join us next time as we expand our awareness of the rules of engagement for sexual violence survivors on Right to Count.